I like salad. Do you like salad?
Welcome to Canadian Salad,
a fun, factual, and friendly podcast about culture and integration in Canada.
I'm one of your hosts. I'm Ho Shen Ho from China, currently living in Vancouver, unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations.
And I'm your other host, Andrea McCoy, an immigrant from the United States, broadcasting you from the unceded traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations.
And you're listening to Canadian Salad!
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another week, another Canadian Salad. We have a guest here. Hoshin couldn't make it today, but I think you'll really enjoy this wonderful conversation. I'll do a brief introduction of my guest, and I think this topic is really going to hopefully encourage many of you, but also inspire many of us to keep working and fighting the good fight. So with me, I have Matthew Singh, and I would like to read his lens and of his lived experience. To give it credit, this is what he wrote. So he is a second generation Canadian-born Chinese settler, the youngest child of a single mother, grandchild of a rich man that lost it all to greed, childhood experience of inundation, abandonment, and Chinglish, a dog dad, a human dad, a husband, son, brother, and friend, born reader and writer, fiction over nonfiction, learned entrepreneur, strategist, and relationship builder, people over profits, love that, resourceful, analytical, and efficient, but not robotic, very good to distinguish, and a lover of films, hockey, and nighttime. And he is also, just to add to that, one of the co-founders and brand director of And Humanity. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
That introduction, your lens is absolutely, I think we could unpack each one and spend a whole episode on each one because there's so much there. But if you could, Matt, what brought you into this work of being a diversity, equity, inclusion, branding, marketing expert?
Thank you so much. And I appreciate the fulsome introduction. Hi, Canadian Salad listeners. My name is Matt, or Matthew, pronounced he, him. I'm calling in from the stolen unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. And to answer how you in terms of how I was brought into this work, it was actually through my sister, who's also the co-founder of And Humanity. She brought the idea of an inclusive marketing agency to my attention probably back in 2018, 2017, around that age, around 7 years ago, or something like that. Yeah. Because she and I, who had been at the time working together for about 10 years together, running a generalist marketing communications agency, she was pregnant at the time with her first son. She has 2 children now, and was like, hey, what if we transition our generalist agency into an inclusive marketing and communications agency? And she, while on parental leave, brought all these statistics and everything, like the business case, but also because she used to work at the CCDI, which is the Canadian Center for Diversity and Inclusion, prior to our marketing career. And I used to work as a journalist for a publication that was all about Asian representation in media. We had like backgrounds in this work. Like when I was working at that publication, the founder was actually a DEI strategist, and he taught me words like interculturalism, intersectionality, and everything like that. Yeah, it was just, you can say, with like merging everything that we had done prior to marketing communications with the agency work we had been doing for a decade. So that's what brought me into the work. And through then, there's been a lot of ups and downs in the journey, but I've definitely woken up every day since then feeling motivated and compelled to do this work, and have found, I can say, my like greater purpose. And I know that I'll be doing this for the rest of my life.
Wow. So what started as your sister's initiative has become this like overwhelmingly like life goal, life purpose, objective.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And can you maybe expand on the name of the company, And Humanity? Because that's a very powerful name just in of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a philosophy or belief that we as marketers, communicators have a responsibility to humanity, hence And Humanity. And the story behind this goes, marketers, communicators, we create content that, billions and billions of people see every day as an industry. So we create content, and with that creation of that content, we have the ability to shape how people see themselves, how people see each other, and society as a whole. We can shape how people think And with that comes a great responsibility. And hence, we believe that we have a responsibility to humanity to create content that is counter stereotypical, authentically inclusive, and basically break the reinforcement of stereotypes that happens in the media sphere, even beyond marketing communications, whether it be in movies, TV shows, journalism, whatever it may be. So we're through marketing and communications trying to counter these stereotypes and create a more authentically inclusive world just through the work that we do. And the industry as a whole, we believe, has a responsibility to humanity as well for that same reason.
Wow. Wow. I'm sure there's probably been for yourself too, a bit of a journey and looking at it from different angles as your own lived experience, but also other kind of perspectives and what inclusion can look like maybe from someone who has maybe neurodivergent abilities or someone who has maybe more just those different intersections, because it's not one size fits all. Like inclusion looks like this for everyone, you know what I mean? But has that been like, because you came from maybe more general marketing to this more inclusive journey, how was that for you in your own life and your own perspective of the world? How did that transform and change for you?
Yeah, big question. And I'll try to answer it in a couple parts if I can remember the parts in my head right now. When Tammy, my sister, first proposed this idea to me of inclusive marketing, what was popular or gaining popularity at the time was multicultural marketing. Okay. And we didn't feel it was a very fulsome definition because multicultural marketing focused mainly on ethnicity, race, obviously. And we understood that there were so many dimensions of difference and identity beyond ethnicity, like you say, neurodivergent folks, as well as people with mobility disabilities, people from the 2S LGBTQI plus community, whatever it may be. There are so many dimensions of identity and difference, and multicultural felt, I guess, quite limiting. And that's why we wanted to pursue this work. But to answer the second part in terms of my own journey towards this and as a marketer and how that kind of, you can say, felt, and also my thought process during that time, it was quite, I can say, difficult, you can say, because a lot of what I was taught as a person of color, being Chinese Canadian and growing up in a, more so, you can say, white society where I was not in the dominant culture, I did feel that I played into the model minority myth a lot, and played into it so much that I did believe a lot of that was where I belonged. And because I had assimilated so well, that is who I was and who I believe that I should be. But part of DEI work is unlearning a lot of foundational things that you were conditioned to learn at a young age. So for me, it was a very difficult journey of facing myself, my own internalized racism, and unlearning a lot of the things that I thought. So that was very challenging during that time. And like we were talking before we started recording about my daughter and what that meant and why that was so difficult, why that was so important, and why it's so difficult now is that I need to make sure that I'm not continuing, because internalized racism, if it's internalized, obviously. So I have to make sure that a lot of what I've been taught through my parents and through ancestors and things like that are not being passed on. So breaking those generational stereotypes and those generational cycles. Breaking those generational cycles is a very difficult thing that requires a lot of therapy and a lot of counseling, a lot of trial and error, as I'm sure as a parent yourself. So it's been a very tumultuous journey that maybe one might assume is simple, but it's been quite tumultuous in that sort of sense.
Yeah, a lot, not easy at all, because it's so multifaceted, and you haven't even, most of us could be honest and say, I haven't arrived. It's not like I'm like, all right, I got this down.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like this ongoing process.
Ongoing process.
Especially living in a colonized part of the world and then even raising our kids in a space and a time where it's, for my son, it's very much like your privilege has a lot of responsibility, and teaching him that when I was never, ever taught that. And likewise, just navigating friendships or, the lack of representation in teachers and schools and things like that. Like, it's just this continuous, effort and self-examination that is, it never takes a rest.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We live in a capitalistic and colonial society and a colonized society that we have to counter on a daily basis for every
Daily.
single thing, or trying to like mitigate. And it's not easy. As simple as when I'm reading her bedtime stories and I have to change the words because I'm like, oh, that's not something that
Yes,
get rid of
yeah.
this book.
No, for
Yeah,
sure.
it's like, yeah, like it's exactly. Oh, that's it. Or yeah, just
Yeah.
simple things like that, or even finding books that represent more so second generation Chinese Canadians rather than something that is stereotyped or something that is maybe too traditional and not representative of her bringing things like that.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
It is. It is. Not to get complicated again, but we're going to
Yeah.
shift into diversity, equity, inclusion, because that's a huge component of what you do. But also, it is, I don't know, Matt, I feel like, so another organization I volunteer for, I tried to bring forward a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging committee. It was like I had unearthed a nuclear weapon. The
Yikes.
reaction I got was everywhere from this is your agenda to this is Marxism. We can't do this. And it was for me that this was my own experience, but this is something that you and many other people of color, even underrepresented people groups have been experiencing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's someone's reaction, the microaggression, or the big overarching, no, we're not going to do this. This is whatever trope or brand they want to put it on. In your opinion, why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important, especially with the current culture that we're in right now?
Yeah, big question. I'll answer it in two different parts. There's the moral imperative and there's the business case. And I'll lead with the business case in terms of this and with regards to marketing communications, because that's the space I work in. But fact of the matter is that our world is evolving. So your audiences as a marketer, communicator, your audiences are becoming increasingly diverse every day. So it's really just making sure you stay relevant in this ever evolving culture. Talk about it as like the new mainstream or whatever it may be. And I think that statistically their stats, 62% of adults identify with at least one marginalized identity. So that's already a majority of people in the world. That's globally too. And for example, the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, 1 in 2 adults report having a relative, a friend, or a colleague from that community already. Again, that's 50% people that already no, and I believe the stats too, and this might be from a couple of years ago, but I think it was GLAAD that reported that I think it was like 10% of people used to identify under the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, but that increased to 20% over the past 10 years or something like that. I don't know the exact stat, but it's doubled over that because more and more people are feeling comfortable identifying under that community. And more stats, like 1 in 6 people in the world will be age 60 years or older or over by 2030, and 1.3 billion people experience some sort of significant disability. So that's 16% of the world's population, and these numbers are all growing. So really, to answer why does DEI matter, it's
why not?
Like, why would it not? All these stats kind of show that like consumers, and even with the anti-DEI climate that's happening, mainly in the state, and I want to emphasize mainly in North America too, because if you look at beyond that, and the US especially sometimes has this feeling like they're the center of the universe, which they are not. But
they aren't. Oh my gosh!
They aren't. No. Yeah, and they sometimes have that. And this is spoken like Canadian. This is perfect for Canadian salads. That's not. Yeah, that's not everywhere. But if you look at studies worldwide, I think Kantar just had a study too. 75% of consumers say that DEI reputation influences their purchase decisions. That's 75%. And most consumers, I think 71% expect brands to promote DEI in their online advertising or their advertising in general. And there's so many stats that support this. We have a whole blog post about recent stats too. Like you're talking about the past, couple months that came out where consumers are not changing their mind. The only thing that we've seen is a lot of consumers are saying they don't want brands to speak about politics specifically, but a lot of what these being politically charged is because of the administration and nothing to do with actual politics. For example, they still, like all the stats show that they still want to see diverse representation. They still want to see brands support underrepresented communities. They just don't want them talking about politics. But I think that's the confusions. Like
It is.
the administration
Well, you
is
made it
making it about
political.
politics. Yeah,
Yeah,
you made it
exactly.
political, but it's not
Exactly.
politics. So with all this, I feel like the minority is quite loud in terms of saying there's a loud minority saying DI initiatives are not important, but all the consumer reports and everything say that it is important. But yeah, if you want to stay relevant in this ever evolving culture, world, society as a brand, you better prioritize DEI initiatives.
Yeah.
And that's internally and externally too, because obviously your own employees, etc., like that. Yeah.
You had mentioned moral imperative.
Yeah.
Do you mind unpacking that just a little bit and the moral imperative of DEI? Because I resonate with that. I feel like it's just the right thing to do. But I would love to hear maybe from your perspective how you would unpack that or define what that moral imperative is.
Yeah. And I have had a lot of conversations with people on my team about this. And one thing that really resonates about the moral imperative, because so the more generic, or generic's not the right word, but the more common answer around the moral imperative is that everyone deserves equal rights, or in many cases, they deserve barriers to remove so that we can achieve equity. And more people than not, even those that are very conservative or very, whatever you want to call it, anti-DEI, believe in equality. They just don't believe in the approach that's gone to that. I don't think it's a debate so much in terms of the moral imperative of, oh, I don't think you're equal to me because you're of a different skin color or you have a different whatever. I don't think that's the debate that's been happening. The moral imperative debate has been a little bit more complex and nuanced than that. So if a majority of the world believes that people deserve equality, then what is this moral ambiguity that we're having? And this is where it comes to the conversation of the moral imperative and how that's related to the how things are done. And the thing with how people are achieving equity, I believe a lot of it is misunderstanding, which really dumbs it. Sorry, not the right word. It really oversimplifies it, but I really do believe it's a lack of education and lack of understanding of how we're trying to achieve equality. And that's where more complex jargon like equity comes in, or topics around affirmative action, like in schools and things like that. And I think the biggest issue is that the misunderstanding comes from insecurity and fear, and the power of fear. And so if, for example, someone who is really conservative, who is really anti-DI, but also believes in equality, goes, I don't believe in something like affirmative action. And you ask them why, and a lot of times they'll be like, you're making decisions based on race, and that's not fair, blah, blah, blah. But the problem with that sort of thinking, and I wish that I had a megaphone that I could talk to everyone with about that. The problem with that thinking is the misunderstanding that history doesn't play a factor into what's happening today. So the whole point of equity is to take history and systemic barriers that have been built into our system in consideration. That's really it. Just consider it. It's, oh yeah, you have more barriers, then we should probably remove that barrier, and then we can quote unquote start at the same point. And because we don't have that barriers. And that's so, like, when talking about, sorry, going back to the question about the moral imperative around sort of work.
You're
you're doing
great.
Kind of a lot. It's a lot about it. But going back to the moral imperative around this work, I think the lack of education and the lack of willingness to learn, because even if I did have that magnet phone, there might be whatever, I think it comes from a lack of diversity around you. For example, I had a lot of conversations with one of our senior strategists who's trans and blind around this sort of topic. And one thing that he always tries to reconfirm or tell people is that he is a human first. He's a human first. And he's been on a lot of debates around, because he's a Paralympian, around trans athletes belonging. He's a male trans athlete, and of course he gets a lot of flack or a lot of pushback for that sort of thing. But in terms of understanding himself as a human first and seeing others as a human first, the problem with this moral imperative is that a lot of folks who are arguing against equity don't have friends or people around them that they've had very in-depth conversations around this sort of topic. And if they do have it, either that person with lived experience may not, again, just because you have lived experience doesn't mean you have cultural competence. So they may not have that cultural competence. So
Sure.
it might further reaffirm. But I do believe a lot of this is building bridges of understanding. And
Yeah.
usually it's comes with seeing other people, not seeing fear first, not seeing change first, not seeing
Yeah.
something I don't recognize and having that gut action first, but actually
Right.
taking time to fully understand someone else as a human. Because I guarantee you, if there's someone like Ness, our senior strategist, talk to someone who is anti-trans, anti-DI, whatever it may be, I bet you at the end of that conversation, they could have not a mutual agreement, but at least a deeper understanding of where he's coming from. And this comes into the play of, is that the job of the underrepresented to educate? But yeah.
You hit on a lot of good points. I feel like relationship is one, education is two, curiosity. I don't know that people are just innately curious. I think we've lost that art of what it is to just be like, that's interesting. Because I think in a slower time and place, I know I'll speak to my age, but like in the 80s, we didn't have social media. We didn't have these phones with us. We just, if you were bored, I remember teaching myself this American Sign Language alphabet because I had nothing to do. And so I just sat there with the book open and I just was like A, B. And because we had nothing to do, we had time on our hands to just sit and observe and cherish. And I feel like we've lost that art. I will say when I immigrated to Canada, I like to say immigrated under the diversity is our strength stream under Justin Trudeau. And that has really shifted in Canada. It was this diversity is what we need. And this is who we are as Canadians. And now I hear and see some people within the DEI industry or even just within that work changing DEI to, I think I read someone had changed it to FAIR, which is fairness, access, inclusion, and representation, which embody the elements of DEI. However, I think I wrestle still with, and not that these people are trying to cave or trying to give in to the megaphones that are saying that's in no DEI. And so they're like, oh, okay, fair. I don't think that's what they're doing, but I don't know. Do you feel like changing the acronym or even just, do you think that's helpful? Or do you think that's a way of making it just more palatable for our current situation in Canada and just the pushback that people are getting? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's all of that. To answer your question shortly, I'll start off by saying I do agree that it's I'll preface that this is not a black or white conversation. It is a very nuanced subject with a lot to consider, because my first initial gut reaction when I saw fair models and other models, people like rebranding, reframing, DEI, I did feel that it was maybe, it's something I would have done. I was like, oh, we got to stand firm and we shouldn't be conceding. And it felt catering to the administration, especially in the States. However, I see three general paths being taken by organizations regarding this. And I would say that there's only one path that I don't recommend. And so I'll go through the three different paths. So first off, like the reframing, rebranding, but a lot of times continuing the work, whether it be reframing as fair model. I've seen people remove the word diversity, like just removing these sorts of words, but continuing the work internally, calling it maybe people, focusing on people and not diversity of people, but focusing people as a whole and belonging, things like that, where you're talking around the subject. And like I said, at first I didn't like that, but I think that my own privilege coming into play in terms of first of all, I'm based in Canada. I'm not in the thick of things in the States. And also I don't have my funding, like a lot of these organizations, tied to rebranding and doing that work. If that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do to continue the work. The only path that I don't recommend is complete conceding and the complete halting of the work, both internally and externally, because I always say you can't erase the internet or your past newsletters and campaign. You can remove it from your site, like DEI from your site now, but your digital footprint is out there forever. And most importantly, people remember. So it's very jarring to halt it all. Your own employees will be like, what the, okay. And also your consumers will be what the, and they'll have your past campaigns, your past newsletter, whatever. So that just shows how fragile your brand positioning is, how performative your past work is, whatever, because you're completely halting the work when you have the ability to do that other option of reframing and rebranding it and things like that. I think that's the only way. But of course, there's the third path of where you're resisting and mobilizing. And there are a lot of brands that are openly saying, no, we're not listening to this. And
Right.
I think with that, you're going to win some audience and you're going to lose some. But the thing that you'll win the most is that you will reaffirm that you were not performative and that your positioning of your brand and the values that you have were real and strong. I
Right.
think that whichever way you do go, there's two truths that remain. Every brand has specific needs and considerations, and thus a specific path is required to take. So I don't want this to be like overly general in that sort of way, but because every brand will be different. But the second thing that remains the same is that no matter what people say in the media, it will never change the fact that the world is becoming more globalized. So I do think, obviously biased in myself, but with the fact of growing diversity, it doesn't make sense to halt everything you're doing for all the reasons that I said. I do believe that reframing and rebranding is a valid thing. I don't like that. At first, I didn't like that. It made it more palatable, but at the same time, if you look at change management theory and you look at how things are quote unquote done, you do have to build bridges of understanding. You have to, like I was saying earlier, you do have to have conversations with folks that don't believe. And I do think that humanness aspect, like the story you told earlier on with your son having that empathy for that unhoused person, I think that a lot of it's so divisive right now that there isn't that sort of room for that sort of empathy and conversation. And even though changing it to the fair model, whatever it may be, is making it more palatable, why is that a bad thing? It might not be a bad thing that we do. That's something that I've needed to process over a bit because,
it is a process. And I feel like when I first saw it, and even when people were saying to me with this committee, we just need to change the words, it just felt like such a kind of a knee-jerk reaction to be very, oh, the big voices are offended. Okay, big voices. Okay, I'll patch it here and there so you can swallow that. I feel, especially even with our kids and with parenting, it's like we shouldn't be afraid of words. If you look at the definition of diversity, equity, inclusion, I firmly believe, and I think you touched on this too, that people aren't inherently against it as much as maybe they've become a little bit complacent with the term itself and complacent with who they are letting have the authority of those words.
I love that. Yeah. Who they're letting have the authority. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, honestly, like if we aren't teaching our kids, like this is a word and this is beautiful in and of itself. And I find that when you break down things very simply for kids, you look at the adults in your life and the conversations you've had, and it's like, I need to break it down simply for everyone, honestly, because I think if we do, it makes sense. My son and I, we were talking about the recent elections in BC, and we were talking about how good it is to have people represented from different cultures and races and backgrounds in politics and in leadership positions, because we as white people don't necessarily know what other people need. And he went off on for about 20 minutes. He was just like, yeah, if you elect a Chinese person, they'll know what Chinese people need, but we won't know what Chinese people need, or we won't know what indigenous people need. And it just clicked for him. And he just had this understanding. But then you try to have that with grown adults and they're like, oh, well, but they're going to take away our rights. But it's just, no one's talking about taking away rights. If there's a cost to all of this, it's ego.
Yeah.
And that is really the bare minimum cost for a lot of people when there are people literally paying it with their lives.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's a spectrum too. Like I think a lot of folks, it's the cost is ego. I think some folks, like I say, it's like just a lack of education and understanding and fear being the driving factor of why they're anti this or anti that. And I will not cast judgment to however people approach trying to convince others of the importance of DEI, if it's reframing, et cetera. And that's something that I wrote a post recently on gatekeeping social justice and how I think that's more harmful than anything. But I understand why that happens too. But anyways, without going into that, I think that there's that spectrum, like I was saying. I think strategically speaking, we again wrote a post on this too, but strategically speaking,
Yeah.
if you are up against the Trump administration where they have the ability to spread their message to millions, because obviously they're the administration, millions,
Right.
and if they are purposely oversimplifying DEI, they say DEI is this, woke is this, whatever, and
Right.
that's just hammering that
Message.
constantly,
Yeah.
that they have purposefully tainted DEI, purposely
Mm-hmm.
tainted it so that people who are even on the fence, who even believe in equality, right?
Yeah.
Like, not talking about equity, but believe in equality, people that believe in it will think that it's a bad thing, right?
Right.
So because they have that power and that ability to do that, I can understand why folks who are trying to achieve that end goal don't use that word,
Right.
because like you can't go against that amount of power, that amount of impressions, that amount of reach that they have, and the
Sure.
ability to do that. So again, that took some time to
Sure.
process. So now then I talk to other folks who work in DI space and them adapting the model. Do they want to? No, but
Yeah.
I can see why they need to do that in
Mm-hmm.
some cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
anyways, yeah.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
does. And it
Yeah.
could, it's, I don't know, it's that code switching, or not even code switching,
Yeah.
but it's more,
Yeah.
okay, if I encode it this way, I can still get the work done, make sure
Yeah.
people are being treated fairly. And okay, at the end of the day, I'm not using the word diversity, but I'm still able to operate in this space and in this time in order to bring more people and to make more equitable
Yeah,
spaces.
you're still gonna roll your eyes at it, but you're like,
You're
okay,
still,
like, yeah, it's
yes.
like, what
Yeah.
can you, the alternative in some cases, not all cases, but alternative
Yeah.
is resisting and trying to
Mm-hmm.
mobilize against this. Again, it's privileged to be able to do that too,
Sure.
right? And that's why we're doing that, because we're
Mm-hmm.
not going to be threatened by that sort of thing. But
Right.
I know a lot of organizations that are directly in quote unquote the crosshairs of the administration, they have to.
Right.
So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. Just, I think the last question, Matt,
Yeah.
how do you see DEI making positive impacts, even with all of these changes, changing in models, maybe changing in words? And then do you have any encouragement for those who are trying to implement these core pieces, maybe initiatives in their workplace, in their organizations, maybe even their own neighborhood and communities? Because as we know, like, it can start at the home and and then it goes from there. But yeah, how do you see DEI making a positive impact, even with all the shifts? And then what would be your encouragement to other people who are trying to implement these things and make a difference to make a better, kinder, and safer world?
Yeah, to answer the first part in terms of DEI making a positive impact, I think post 2020, there was so much momentum for this.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, it's obviously waned since then. But I
Yeah.
think we all saw the positive changes
Yeah.
of what could happen since then. And I think if it's like the civil rights movement, it didn't in the US, it didn't happen overnight, right? There's peaks and there's
Sure.
valleys. And I think
Yeah.
that we will see over time that there will be a change in how people see things and how they're educated and things
Mhm.
like that. And I think that the positive impact is tenfold. It's not just in the small space that we work in marketing communications, where brands and their employees and customers that they talk to will be affected. But I think in your own familial relationships, your friendships, etc., everybody wants to be seen and heard. That's a
Yeah.
fundamental truth. And I think that right
Yeah.
now we're not prioritizing that in the media sphere and things like that. But
Mm.
I do think that as much as there's an anti-DI sentiment, there's been so much countering that, because I think you
Mhm.
mentioned this before recording, like an absolute evil, and then makes it easier to put this conversation more on a platform and a pedestal again,
Mhm.
because I think people have seen the positive impact of DEI. And yeah, in terms of encouragement to people that, I guess you were saying, do this work. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Do this work,
Encouragement to
or
them?
trying to maybe even start kind of those
Yeah, start in
initiatives.
turn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Where
I
they
think
live. Yeah.
I think the main thing is that because DEI at its core, a lot of it is you can say, building relationships with folks that, whether it be on a singular scale or macro or micro scale, building relationships with folks that are not like yourself, that are
Yeah.
different. If you look at it in that sense, I hope you're encouraged by the fact that we are all human at the core. And
Mhm.
because we are human at the core, learning about other types of humans will help you build stronger relationships with people that are not like yourselves so that you're not stuck in friend groups or whatever groups where everyone is the same and thinks the same. I think most people agree that diversity of thought is great for your own growth. And I think that's a lot of what DEI is trying to promote is like, hey, let's try to, expand our thinking beyond people that think like ourselves and look like ourselves and things like that. And I know it may be scary for those folks that kind of do that, but you can start small. Like I say, for those who want to start this sort of journey, just go on Instagram, TikTok, whatever platform you use, and try to follow folks that don't look like yourself and speak with different opinions and things like that, because that will help expand your mindset and your thinking. So
yeah. No, that's great. And it actually, when you were talking about both things, it brought me back to your lens perspective or your introduction, the people over profit. I mean, at the end of the day, profit and impact can't always be measured, like you said, right? Like money isn't always going to be the factor that we say that was successful or that was meaningful or that was, oh, good, I'm glad we did that. But that people aspect over the profit, that we are connected, because at the end of the day, when we all die, depending on your belief in the afterlife, but I don't know very many afterlife visions or beliefs where you're taking that money with you. It leaves. And so if we look at people being that profit, like building a people economy as opposed to maybe our monetary economy, I feel like maybe we could make something that's more beautiful or realize that it's just right in front of us. We just have to open our eyes. And we have to take time and space to realize that. Yeah.
I love that about the people economy. And I think one last thing is that like people and profit, I know my lens says people over profits, but it's so intertwined too. Just to talk about the business case, what is the most expensive part in terms of when it comes to expenses for your business is usually your people. If you're not treating them fairly, or if you're not prioritizing DEI, or if you're not focusing on them as humans, right? There's turnover, and turnover is extremely expensive and everything like that. So there's always a moral imperative, but there's always a business case behind that.
There is.
When it comes to, people.
Yeah. And the data doesn't lie. The stats, the data. And there's so much of it. Yes. We'll wrap up, Matt. We have a few more things before we go. Is there anywhere maybe our listeners could find you or learn more about And Humanity? Or even, do you have any good online resources you want to do a shout out to learn or to point people in if they are just maybe on the brink of engaging with DEI?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So you can find our agency, And Humanity. Like I said, we're an inclusive marketing communications agency. You can find us at www.andhumanity. That's andhumanity.ca or .co. Either one work. Okay. And we also have a book that if you're starting your journey or you're interested in this sort of stuff and you're in the marketing communications world, it's called Authentically Inclusive Marketing. You want to be inclusive, but you don't know where to start. So it's got a breadth of diverse authors that kind of answer questions around what exactly is inclusive marketing, what's the future of marketing, that sort of stuff, and how do you integrate it into your day-to-day work. So you can find that on our website as well. And lastly, if you want to follow myself or my content, you can find me, Matthew Sang. You can find me on LinkedIn pretty easily. I post almost every day of the week content on inclusive marketing communications.
It's good stuff too. I really enjoy all your stuff.
Thank you.
It's a wide variety of medias and contents.
Thank you.
I highly recommend. And we'll include all of those links, all those things that you mentioned in our show notes so people can access that. For those of us who are joining us, maybe you're new to the podcast, every episode we end with a Canadian salad pop quiz where I quiz our guest. Unfortunately, Matt doesn't know the question that I'm going to ask, but I'm going to quiz him on something related to this topic, which is, I think, really challenging for me, Matt, because this is your wheelhouse. This is not my wheelhouse. So finding a question was a little bit tricky, but maybe you already know this. So gold stars to you. So are you ready for the question, Matt?
I'm ready. And I'm ready to ask you a question.
Okay. Yes. Okay. You can't phone a friend or call your mom. I'm so sorry. Okay. When was the first time that the word diversity was included in a act of law legislation in Canada?
That is so hard.
Really?
Act of law. I want to say that, or the 50s or the 60s. Am I even close?
Is that your final answer?
Yes.
is 1988 with the
Oh, that is
Canadian
so sad.
Multiculturalism
That is
Act.
so sad.
Yes.
That is so
yeah.
sad.
That's
Oh,
okay.
That's a good one.
That's okay. It's a good act. I recently wrote a piece about that, but it's it's right there in there where diversity and inclusion is important for all cultures, and it tags onto the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms around 1982. So
I'm always shocked by how recent these. There was one recently about like when women were allowed to ask for a business loan from a bank in Canada, and it was like 1970s or 80s. I was like, what?
Oh my God.
Are you serious? It's something ridiculous. I was like, that's not in the 50s. Like, my mom was an entrepreneur
Should
back
be.
in the 50s, so she couldn't even get a loan herself. Like,
It's wild.
Yeah,
It's wild.
exactly.
Yeah. Good job. You came close. So
Thank
I'll
you.
give you half a gold star. How about that?
Okay, I'll take it. Great.
All right. Do you have a question for me?
Yes, I do. I
Okay.
wanted to know what made you start Canadian Salad.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a question I do know the answer to. So yes,
It's not a quiz question. It's
No.
no.
I, as an immigrant from the States, I remember moving to Canada and feeling again under the banner of Justin Trudeau's diversity is our strength. I thought, wow, this is really huge for the leader of this country to be espousing this kind of narrative that diversity is our strength. And when the first Trump presidency happened, I started seeing and hearing more of the rhetoric, and a lot more racism was coming out. A lot more people felt emboldened, and I, in my heart, just didn't want that for people here. And so I wanted to create a space that talked about the questions and the kind of the issues and the invisible adjustments that many immigrants and many people of different cultures and races experience as they're navigating a very white and colonized space. A lot of things that people didn't feel that they could talk about because they had to assimilate. They had to keep their head down, their mouth shut, because it was survival for many of them. And I wanted to start a podcast that normalized these questions, that talked about these issues head on. And I pinged my best friend from my master's program, Hoshin. And I said, Hoshin, do you want to do this with me? And he said, absolutely. And that's what started the podcast. Yeah. So it's Canadian Salad, because that was for me when I moved to Canada. I remember hearing, oh, we're not like the States. We're not a melting pot. We're a salad where everyone can be who they are.
Yeah.
And so I thought that would be the name of the podcast, because if we are truly a salad, and if maybe the dressing, you could go back to our very first episode, we talked about the analogy of a salad, but the values of just wanting to live free and wanting to live peaceably with our neighbor and to be respected and honored and included is really the dressing of the salad that we feel Canada has the potential to embody fully. Not yet, she's not there, but we do believe that with people like you, Matt, and myself and Hoshin and so many others who are unspoken or unnamed right now in this space right now are working really hard to make that reality for all of Canada. Yeah. So that's Canadian
great.
Salad.
Yeah, thank you for telling me the story. Yeah, story didn't have a real, it's really just for me because I was curious.
That's okay. Just before we say goodbye, what would be, if thinking about a salad, what would you embody in a salad? Like a fruit, vegetable, condiment?
Okay.
Yeah, what would be your...
I don't know. The first thing that came to my mind is tomato.
Okay.
And because I think a lot of people, okay, I don't want to say a lot of people, but my partner doesn't like tomatoes in salads, and I do.
Hey.
And I was like, oh, maybe that's what makes me different. But also, I like that I guess it stands out and it's a little bit among all the green. And I particularly think it's versatile because it's really good in burgers too. So there's that.
It is a versatile,
it's
sun-dried.
versatile.
Yeah,
sun-dried. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's like the, what do you call it? The baby, I forgot the name. Baby
Yeah,
ones.
cherry tomatoes.
Cherry,
berry
exactly.
tomatoes.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So, so there's a lot of versatility.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Gosh.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt, so much for joining me and for sharing your perspective, your lens, your background. Honestly, this is a topic that I think I hope never gets tiring. And I hope that it's something that people continue to talk about, because we need to. We are diverse as people. Just in our very being, our atoms, everything that makes us is diverse. So if you're listening, please follow us on TikTok. We are also on Instagram and Blue Sky. We're tinkling our toes over there in Blue Sky land, but give us a shout out. Let us know what you thought of the episode, and definitely reach out to Matt. Check out And Humanity Marketing, and thanks so much for joining us, and have a wonderful week. Canadian Salad is written and produced in British Columbia, Canada by Hoshin Ho and Andrea McCoy. Theme music is by Naver Avetyan from Pixabay.
This has been a Good Drinklin production.